Serious, people who have come out of comas, what was the most jarring thing you learned to have happened while in a coma? 6 years ago my dad was in a coma, after collapsing and having a huge list of things go wrong. Anyway, he's in a coma for 9 months with 3% chance of survival. The hospital had called us to say that we should come and say goodbye as they were going to turn the ventilator and life support off. 5 days after saying goodbye we get a call saying that he was breathing on his own and responding to medication. The drugs he had been given during his coma had made him deaf, so he had to deal with that. One night he called my mum at about 3 AM asking for his motorbike, his leathers and helmet, a toolbox, his iPod, a torch, some rope and his glasses. He told my mum that he was going to break out by climbing down the window and riding home. The nurses heard him shouting to my mum and managed to calm him down, but looking back on it seems quite funny. 6 months later and he was home. I came home from school one day and he was in the kitchen. I went in to say hi and tell him I was home and he started pointing a knife at me and telling me to get out of his house. He didn't know who I was and couldn't understand why I was in his kitchen. I called my mum and she came home and sorted it all out. It's been 6 years since and he's one of the most horrible people I know and a nasty alcoholic. I was in a coma for nearly 2 months. When I came to, I didn't know how to read or write, had difficulty talking, had to learn how to eat and drink again, as well as gain strength back to even sit in a chair. It took me a few months to go from being able to sit up to actually walking without a walker. I lack about a year or more worth of memories from my early 20s. I also suffer from mild PTSD due to memories my brain created while in the coma of events in my life that never happened that were horribly traumatic. I have horrible nightmares due to those memories still. I also dreamt of events I saw happen over the next few years after coming out of the coma. I don't know if all of that is common, just my little experience. My coma was shorter and my jarring thing less jarring than many in this thread. Obviously it's pretty jarring to wake up seriously injured, but you're there so obviously mostly okay, and you seem to have all your body parts even though they don't all work. Then people start telling you about all the scary things that happened and how the doctors weren't sure you were going to wake up. I was afraid I would die when I went back to sleep. I was really scared to sleep the first night. I woke up after a 9-day medically induced coma on the 28th of December. Christmas music was playing and Coca-Cola Polar Bear commercials were on TV in the hospital. I was full of drugs and disoriented, and had to ask a family member, is today Christmas? Is Christmas the 28th, only to realize that it was the 25th and I'd missed it. I was in a coma for a few weeks. I relate to a lot of what has been said here. I had hyponatremia, an electrolyte disturbance caused by low sodium levels 109. I was in cardiac arrest before I was revived and put into an induced coma. The last thing I remember was feeling incredibly sick and vomiting a lot and generally feeling like I was going to die. My next memory is of needing to pee really badly but not wanting to go because I had to wake up first. I kept trying to wake myself up from the dream so that I could go to the toilet. I then recall a blonde nurse telling me to stop pulling at my tubes, what my name was, where I was, and what happened. I just told her I needed to pee and she said I could pee because I had a catheter in. I felt like it was an elaborate plot to make me pee myself. My short-term memory was gone. I was absolutely convinced I was dreaming. I then requested that everything be taken out immediately. I had tubes in every orifice and several IV lines stitched into my neck and wrist. They were stitched because they had previously tried to bring me out of the coma, but apparently I became incredibly aggressive every time. I kicked a doctor in the head, bit a nurse, slapped my mother, and tried to pull out all of my lines. Apparently this is not that unusual. Bizarre. I'm a really passive person. The lines came out that day and like one of the other posters the openings became infected in my neck. I also had severe bruising from being restrained after the above incidents. I was moved to a ward after a few days and I remember wandering around the hospital in a dressing gown eating an ice cream cone early in the morning and wondering when this weird dream was going to end. I was completely disoriented. I lost most of my hearing but I didn't realize I'd lost it until weeks later when I was let out and saw my GP and he asked me why I was yelling and I asked him why everyone was whispering. It came back after about 6 weeks. It's about 6 months later and I still feel very disoriented, but less so. I can't really explain it other than to say that I don't feel right. I feel like a ghost. Life has been dreamlike ever since. It has a surreal quality. I'm finding it hard to adjust to civilization. I've been extremely depressed since. Have chronic insomnia. And it still hurts every time I breathe and or turn because I tore most of the intercostal muscles in my back during the seizures. I hope things improve. My dad was put into an induced coma, I think. I'm not sure whether it was induced or not. A few months ago upon falling from a pretty big ladder. He's with it now for the most part, but when he just recently came from the coma at the hospital, he couldn't remember me, being his 17-year-old son, or my older sister, but he could remember my 3 other siblings, as he came to. He couldn't be swayed and thought that I was a lot younger than I am and couldn't shake the fact that I'm 17 for a while. He also forgot my name, and was pretty violent to nurses and the like. He's fine now, except from a couple little details, but he's fully functional and remembers everything. He spent 2 months in hospital for the injury. Considerably older, sorry, I'm the youngest by about 7 years. I had brain surgery due to a birth defect, Chiari-1 malformation. I know that I went in for surgery on the 11th of July, 1999, that took out part of my brain, removed the back part of my skull and some vertebrae and put my brain in what I call a brain hammock to hold it in place since they were not going to return the back part of my skull. I remember bits and pieces after that. I remember a guy nurse who iced my legs for me because I thought that they were on fire while I was in ICU. Guess I had the really good drugs. I remember me yelling at my mom and best friend instructions on where to take the surgery pager, and possibly where to stick it, a pager to notify them when I was out of surgery, because their voices hurt my soul. Kinda like nails on a board. And then I remember waking up in a private room that was not ICU, with the TV on and the sad news of JFK Jr. His wife and sister-in-law had been declared dead after their plane had been found on the 16th of July, 1999. So there are about 5 days that I do not remember at all. It was a bit of a recovery, learning how to walk and not shuffle, talk and not drool, and just remembering things. My mom would show me a picture of me and my friends doing something awesome and I would have no memories of it at all. I had no emotions about the picture other than anger because it was a picture of me, where I could not recall the memory or even the reflection of myself staring back at myself. It was frustrating to say the least. Also, my personality changed. I became darker, and according to a few people who I knew before and after the surgery, I also became meaner. I was always a joker and made people laugh, but now I was more sarcastic. I was more of a wallflower before surgery, or at least I was according to my sad journals from junior high and high school. Thank God and or Oprah that I kept them. I was a doormat for many people, and after the surgery, I guess I grew a pair of balls and I started to curse like an effing sailor. Keeping it clean for this post, and stop allowing people to walk all over me. Years later, though I am luckier than most who have the same surgery, I still have memory loss. That is current thing. Around the same time every year during July as when I had the surgery, I have OCD ADD, which I did not have pre-surgery, and I am completely obsessed with the color red. It has been an interesting journey and I know that I am lucky. Even with the painful headaches that I have still today, I know that I am luck. PS. If I misspelled anything, I had brain surgery, give me a dang break and don't point it out. I have 2 situations which should answer your question. First, backstory. On the 30th of July 1990, my family was involved in a severe car accident. I suffered a depressed skull fracture resulting in an emergency craniotomy and removal of obviously necrotic brain tissue, of which amounted to roughly 1/3 of my total brain mass. As a precaution, I was placed in a medically induced coma which lasted for 6 days. Mind you, I was 5 years old. 1. While in ICU directly following surgery, I vividly remember hearing my mother singing a lullaby. Due to other injuries I suffered, they had my eyes taped shut. I remember trying to open my eyes to see my mom's face. I was startled when I couldn't. I started to cry because I was scared and had no idea what was happening, and hearing her voice gave me great joy. Remember, this is entirely auditory. I remember hearing a strong male voice tell my mother to stop singing and to leave because it was upsetting me. Hearing her beg to stay by my side was the most painful experience of my life. 2. As a child, death was unbeknownst to me. Also, as an innocent child, I never imagined my parents could lie to me. When I came out of my coma, I had lots of physical therapy and lots of time on my hands. I began to ask questions. First of all, I wanted to know about my dog Sheba. She and I were inseparable and she was in the car with us, so I asked my father where she was. Important. My parents had only recently divorced and my father was already remarried. He told me that Sheba was fine and with my grandfather who was taking care of her. I was thrilled to hear this and went on with it for several weeks. Then late one evening, the doctors allowed my mother to take me outside for the first time. She took me to a very nice part of the patio and broke the news that while all three of us, my mother, brother, and I, survived, Sheba wasn't so lucky. This was the first time I had ever confronted death, and it was the first time I had ever realized my own mortality and how close I came to dying. It still makes me cry when I think back on this. I consider it the day I lost my innocence. Sadly, I have more stories, like finding out that my father tried to block my 8-hour life-saving surgery because he wanted a second opinion while I had brain matter leaking from my ear. TLDR. There is no TLDR. This took a lot for me to write about, so please take the time to read this. When I was in second year at university, I was hit by a car while riding my bike to school. I was put into a coma for 2 weeks to help my brain recover, as my head had absorbed the impact. My first memory after waking up was getting my catheter removed, and that was a couple of days after I was taken out of the coma. The weirdest part was my vision. My optic nerve had been split in the accident, so my former perfect vision was, and still is, really messed up. My right eye is pretty much useless, as I can only see out of about 10% of it. My left eye still has about half of its vision, and is the only one with central vision. I was confused for the first few weeks, as everything was different. In addition to my loss of vision, I lost my sense of smell. I have no recollection from my time in the coma, and I'm glad that I don't remember anything. From what I was told, it was not a happy time for my family and friends. I can honestly say that being in a coma was the least memorable experience of my lifetime. My uncle passed away 1 year ago this coming Monday. He was 36 and had horrible lung cancer that spread to his brain, spine, and hip bones before it was found and took him in less than 2 years. Anyway, one of my favorite stories, and one we still tell when reminiscing, is about him waking up from a coma about 6 months before he passed. He had been out for about a week and everyone was at his bedside because the doctors were sure this was the end. His sister was in his room, holding his hand and telling him about her day. She kept talking about how tired she was and how much work she had left to do, and she said something to the effect of, "I guess I'll go down and get a Starbucks before I start working." His finger moved and she sat up straight and said, "You probably miss Starbucks." He squeezed her hand. She said, "If you wake up, I promise that you can have a caramel macchiato." He squeezed her finger again. So she called her husband, who was downstairs, and told him to buy one and bring it to her quickly. She kept talking to him and asking him to wake up and promising him he could have a caramel macchiato if did. Well, by the time the coffee got there, he was sitting with his eyes open and the nurses were checking on him. He watched the coffee cross the room and change hands. His sister took a straw and sucked some up on it to just put it on his lips and told him he could have a taste. He interrupted her and said, "I can do it myself," and stuck out his hand. He drank a whole grand caramel macchiato in like 5 minutes and then asked for pancakes. He ate all of them. He left the hospital 2 days later. It was incredibly confusing and messed me up for a good bit. I started the whole ordeal at a family reunion, eating approximately 3 times my weight in chicken fingers. Bloated, but enjoying the atmosphere of the park we were in. I took a bit of a walk among the trees. The sound of the cicadas was quite annoying and the hospital bed was very uncomfortable. That's pretty much how the transition happened to me. I don't remember having the seizures or vomiting the several pounds of chicken into the breathing mask and breathing partially digested poultry to get myself a nasty case of pneumonia. All it was for me was walking in the woods and then waking a week later in a hospital bed alone and with a monitor plug of concentric needles dangerously close to my crotch. The big thing I learned happened in my coma was very personal, and it was how much my memory was affected. The realization came after I had left the hospital and was trying to take a bath for the first time. I got undressed, filled the tub, got in, soaked my washcloth, and wrapped the soap in the cloth. I stopped then, realizing I honestly had no idea what the next step in the process was. I know I had to transfer the soap to the cloth, but the how of the process was just a big dark spot in my memory. I later got to thinking and realized that I have about 4 or 5 memories that I actually remember from before the seizure, and even those are blurry. I remembered things like who my mom and dad were, and my friends. I just didn't remember doing anything with them. I was pretty unhinged for a while after that, and now my biggest fear is memory loss. I feel my fear is very reasonable. TLDR, WTF, how I use soap. My cousin was in a car accident 3.5 years ago. She was in a coma for 5 months, and when she woke up, she couldn't walk, talk, eat or anything like that. She had damage to her frontal lobe which affected her personality, etc. She loved her mother who she hated before the accident. My parents pretty much raised her. She could write a few words and kept asking for her abusive ex-husband, who was in jail at the time for beating the crap out of her. She didn't know who her 3 kids were, and anytime we brought them to visit, she couldn't stand them being there for more than a few minutes. She also got very violent and would grab me by the hair or try to break my fingers. She died last year from complications due to the accident. She never left the rehab center. I became a nurse, hoping one day she could leave that place and live with me so I could take care of her. But I guess it's better now that she's gone, because the life she had was no life at all. She was in a lot of pain and was pretty much a vegetable, but at least she's not suffering anymore. When I was 10, I was in a medically induced coma for 3 days and woke up to find that my family had been in a severe car accident. I lost 3/4 of my right leg, broke my femur, and was paralyzed from the knee down on the right side as well. My left leg was crushed between the seat in front of me and my seat. The accident was in a van and had to be cut open to relieve pressure because it was swelling so fast. I ended up needing multiple blood transfusions, but at first I was losing so much blood the medical team couldn't even place a knife. The hardest part of all this was waking up to be told that the doctors wanted to amputate my leg, and that my mom and uncle had been taking turns staying with me to make sure they didn't. The second scariest was being told I won't walk ever again. That all happened 13 years ago. In the hospital I did learn how to walk, and now I only need a lower leg brace to help out. I have a regular life, job, kids, etc. And I can't imagine what my life would be like if I didn't go through that accident. I do have recurring medical issues and pretty intense leg pain. I'm actually currently looking into elective amputation because my lower leg causes so many problems in my daily life. Anyway, that's my story. Well, the gist of it. After I broke my neck, I was sedated heavily, medically induced coma, and lost about 2 weeks out of my stream of consciousness. There are a few times that I surfaced, apparently, but I recall very little. That, or I'm unsure what was real. I do, however, vividly remembering 2 moments. The first was seeing the devil, some demon at the foot of my bed. Think the demons in the Spawn series, but real. But no one else could see him. They just tried to calm me down. My second memory is being underneath the bleachers at my high school football stadium, asking my dad to help me remove my helmet. I couldn't breathe. I'd had a tracheotomy and pneumonia was hitting hard, and ended up cussing him out, demanding he help and strap the helmet so I could breathe. It's a pretty terrible feeling when no one else can see what you see, and instead of reacting the way you expect, they just try to calm you down. Makes me wonder about how easily we start questioning our sanity with no external comparison. A drunk driver hit me going the wrong way down a 2-lane road in my college town. I was badly injured and rushed to the hospital. No insurance, but that's another story. When I woke from the coma, my future husband of 8 years walked out on me. He left a note next to the bed saying he decided he didn't love me anymore a few months back, and seeing that I wouldn't walk again probably, he just didn't want to stay. Massive medical bills. Oh my god. I went into serious depression just wanting to die over the bills. I got most written off because I was unemployed since I was fired because I had to take so much time off work. All is well today. I can walk though I have horrible back pain. I'm married to the greatest man ever, and I have my dream job of being a writer. TLDR. Crap happened. Life got better. It wasn't really a coma, but I was out for nearly a day. I got sideswiped while go-karting and slammed into a wall at 90 kph. I knew I was knocked out unconscious, but was still aware and literally in this timeless dream state for what seemed like eternity. I was trapped half inside my body and half outside. Everything was so vivid and colorful. I was seeing everything as vibrating energy, which is literally what matter is. Slow down light vibrating at different frequencies. Everything relating to humans just felt so fantasy and trivial. I could hear noises through my ears, but it was like I was not there. I was just a part of everything. Humans looked alien to me, but also familiar. It was like a dream, so it is hard to recall and explain as it happened. But it made me realize that time doesn't actually exist and separation is an illusion. Everything is interconnected. I'm not religious, but I am very open to Eastern teachings such as Buddhism because it explains reality in a way I can relate to. My mother was in a medically induced coma for a few weeks about 2 years ago. We were told when they started easing her meds so we would expect her to wake up. We saw it very quickly, as she dozed in and out a bit, but then she opened her eyes and seemed wide awake. She had a feeding tube and breathing apparatus in on and all kinds of wires, so she couldn't exactly speak with us. At first it was mostly us talking to her, and telling her what was going on, and explaining everything to her, and she seemed to grasp everything pretty well. She'd gotten sick, and very weak, and eventually fell and hit her head very hard, and was found about a day later. Soon we started asking her standard yes/no questions and she became frustrated when she couldn't communicate easily back to us. The first suggestion from someone was give her your phone, so she can write on that, and that really upset my mother. She shook her head no. So we sent someone out to a nurse to get pen and paper. She's not the most tech savvy person in the world, so I tried to show her that you could write on an app with your finger, but she is having none of it. They came back in a moment, and she proceeded to write I can't type. That's why she needed paper, to tell us she couldn't type to us on her phone. When she started writing, we of course realized she was completely whacked out of her mind anyway, and the drugs were far from wearing off. When I was 14, my mom suffered severe brain damage at the age of 46 due to a potentially fatal brainstem stroke, which we were told has a survival rate of around 1/10,000 or 0.01%, and was in a coma for about 7 days. For the next following months, she could barely write, talk, communicate, and myself and others had to try and ask questions that she could just nod to. She was in therapy for about 6 months afterwards, and to this day she has a totally different voice, cannot drive, read, or write as well, and she must go to sleep much longer. Her short-term memory isn't very good, and her memories surrounding the accident are nil. While she was hospitalized, we found out that my mom had been having an affair with my dad. While slowly regaining her memories, she somehow convinced herself that she never did anything and she's always loved my dad, which sucks because they split up over the resulting problems they had afterwards. Thankfully, my mom still loves me more than ever. 5 years later, I'm 19, and she has all of the memories of growing up as my mom and the experiences we had. It's been really hard for me, because the mom I have now is not the woman I spent my first 14 years with, but I still love her. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.